1989. I should probably cut that before I get a copyright strike. Hey everybody, this is Josh Ronquist here for Heavy Debriefings, and yes, it is time to talk about my top 10 albums of 1989. If you want to know about all the rules that I use to make these lists, it's in the description below. But as long as we're good with that, let's start off with number 10, and Annihilator, with Alice in Hell. Yes, a very underrated band. I mean, of course, if you really know your thrash metal, power thrash, and horror metal, you know of Annihilator, and you especially know of the almost title track, Alice in Hell. But for those that dig a little bit deeper, this album is a fantastic album. It's got that great power thrash falsetto feel behind it. They never really wrote another album like this, and I appreciate that about Annihilator. They don't write the same album twice. Even when they do something like Metal and Metal 2, they sound different. And you can get that great variety spice of life with Annihilator. But with Alice in Hell in particular, it's just that great feeling of that late 80s feel. It's got the horror metal aspects that I appreciate about it. It's got great production for the time. It's got great, fantastic vocals. Of course, Jeff Waters is one of the most underrated guitarists of all time, and you can hear that through his solos and riffs throughout this entire album. Annihilator is a fantastic band, and I recommend that you check them out if you enjoy your falsetto bands, like I talked about on last week's edition, whether it's Sanctuary, Queensryche, King Diamond, any of that good stuff. Of course, again, Annihilator is a band that you should check out if you enjoy them, and I would definitely say, might as well start off with the cream of the crop, Alice in Hell. Going in at number 9, and when I was putting this list together, I'm dumbfounded that this came out all the way back in 1989. It feels so much newer than that, but it's not. But it is Godflesh with Street Cleaner. Yes, this perfect blend of industrial and metal combined. It was some of the darkest electronic music that you could find at the time. No one was really making music like Godflesh then, and it's jaw-dropping to see how well it still holds up. I mean, if you enjoy the industrial sound, there's so much to appreciate about what's going on here. So many new ideas at the time that just fit together so very well. The sound clips that are used are fantastic. The vocals are nice and heavy. The riffs are just jaw-droppingly heavy, especially for the type of sound that they're going for. And Godflesh has just been one of those bands that is so underground, but they're so good at what they do. And when you discover them, when you check them out for the first time, you are blown away. Even if you've heard bands that have taken their style and perfected it for themselves, no one quite does it like Godflesh. And yeah, I gotta say that with Street Cleaner. Again, if you want that great 80s feel of like 80s metal and industrial and dark, nearly evil stuff going on, I can't recommend Godflesh and Street Cleaner enough. Coming in at number 8 is a band that is so wacky that I can understand why you'll never get into them. But once you do give them a shot, if you can appreciate everything that's going on, you're gonna love what you hear. And that's Voivod. And especially with the album Nothing Face. Yes, Voivod has that great sound of progressive, experimental, thrashy, jazzy, and punk movements going on, and you never know what you're going to get with a Voivod album. Sometimes it's a little more straight ahead, sometimes it's much more jazzy. Nothing Face really shows off more of the progressive side of the band. Not to say that other albums don't do that, but Nothing Face is just like that great combination of it. And yeah, I mean, everyone in this band knows how to play, and they know how to sing, and they know how to use their instruments well. And while this might be a little off-putting depending on your style, I think it's one of the albums that's kind of easier to get into, and that's so weird to say that because with every Voivod album it can be so different, but at least for my sensibility, I think Nothing Face is the album that you should give a shot to. And you can see how so many bands were inspired by Voivod and tried to do their own thing and perfect it in their own different ways. I mean, the fact that a band like Imperial Triumphant got Snake to be able to do some vocal lines on their album Spirits of Ecstasy from last year, I mean, you can definitely hear the Voivod influence in Imperial Triumphant, even though they sound completely different. And that's when you know you're an influence. But yeah, if you want something that's just off the wall, progressive, and goes into so many different territories, like thrash, like punk, like jazz, check out Voivod. And especially with the album Nothing Face. Coming up at number 7 is a band that has broken up as of a couple days ago, even though there is the blank LA version of that. I say blank because you may not know who I'm talking about yet. I, of course, am talking about the band Terrorizer and their most seminal album, World Downfall. Yes, this album is one of the seminal albums when it comes to death metal, punk, and grind. It is an absolutely insane album. The songs are short and sweet, and so to the point. It holds up in 2023 like nothing else, and it's so sad to see that the Pete Sandoval version has broken up. Of course, Terrorizer LA is hopefully still going strong and hopefully going to be going on stronger than ever. But just, everything that goes into a band when they split off and they have their own incarnations and stuff like that, yeah, I can still appreciate both sides for what they're trying to do, even though I wish that they were just back together, working together. That's not how life works. So if you want to hear any of this material live, I would recommend seeing Terrorizer LA, if you get the opportunity. But if you just want to check out the music, if you just want some fast, chaotic, real-world music, I can't recommend Terrorizer enough. And of course, their seminal album, World Downfall, is the perfect album to start with. And if you haven't heard it by now, you're gonna love what you heard. And of course, going on with that, I might as well continue on with the death grind. And the lone album from this band, Repulsion, with Horrified. Yes, this album is a grind masterpiece. It is what so many bands have tried to replicate, they try to duplicate, and they can never get close to it. Sometimes it's even better, but you'll never get that Repulsion sound the way that Repulsion did it. Of course, when you look at everything that this band was able to accomplish with just one album, a few EPs, and a lot of splits, you can see the impact that the band truly had on this underground style. And when it comes to all of that, I still feel like this album holds up better than some grind albums that came out later, if not decades later. And it's so great to just know that in 1989, this was really starting to impact people and ideas that were going to be coming forward in the future. And for my personality, when I need some grind, Repulsion is one of the first choices I go to. Of course, you got your Napalm Death, you got Exhumed, although they're more on the death grind kind of things. Misery Index, you got so many great bands that have been inspired by Repulsion, but none can ever truly be Repulsion. And if you never checked out grind before and you want to see what it's all about, if you want that raw aggression, if you want that unearthed sound, yeah, you can't do much better than Repulsion and the album Horrified. Continuing on here at number 5 is Morbid Angel with their debut album Altars of Madness. Yes, one of the greatest death metal albums of all time. I don't think it's out of the realm of cohesion to say that this is probably the best Morbid Angel album, although there is arguments for so many great other albums. Domination is another great example. The band's latest album, I think, is a great example of that. There's been some hiccups along the way. Blessed Be the Sick is another great example of a great album. But, it's just, there's so many great things that came from this particular album. So many bands were inspired by Morbid Angel, and for me, especially the first time I got to see Morbid Angel, they played so many songs off this album, and it was so killer to see this in a live setting. While the production does sound raw, it sounds perfect for the songs that are being played. The musicianship is just on the edge of sloppy. You know that fine line between perfection and sloppy? That's Altars of Madness. It's just like it's on the verge of falling apart, but it never does. And of course, one of my favorite death metal songs of all time, Maze of Torment, just happens to be on this album. Who'da thunk it? But yes, for classic death metal, if you haven't checked out Morbid Angel, I'm positively shocked that you've never checked them out. But if you want that great American old school death metal sound, and you've already heard Death and you've already heard Obituary, but you want something else from that Florida sound, of course you gotta check out Morbid Angel and Altars of Madness. At number 4, I got Sepultura with Beneath the Remains. The album before everything kinda changed for the band. This is one of the last ones that really maintained that death metal and black metal influence in their thrashy and groove metal sound. Of course, Arise is the album where it might be the pinnacle sound of what they've done, but Beneath the Remains is one of those albums that is just perfection from start to finish. It's got that great chaotic sound. The Cavalera brothers just sound fantastic on this album. Andres on his style as well, and of course Paulo holding it deep with the bass. This is blackened death thrash metal done to perfection. And while later albums start to get much more groovier and then progressive, and of course everything that's happened after Max left and then after Igor left, you know, it divides people. I love those albums as well. But there is something to be said about the early day Sepultura, and there's a reason why people still talk about them to this day. And yeah, I can't say enough good things about it. Sepultura, Beneath the Remains. If you need something fast and heavy, this is the album for you. Coming in at number 3 is one of my favorite bands, and I feel like they never got the recognition that they deserve, and especially what seems to be nearly a curse with all of their vocalists in some way, shape, or form. It's hard to talk about them, but they need to be talked about because they are that good. And of course, I am talking about the band Metal Church and the 1989 album Blessing in Disguise. Metal Church has that great blend of traditional heavy metal, almost thrash metal, almost progressive metal, almost new wave of British heavy metal sound. But they're able to combine everything together with such fantastic vocals, no matter who the vocalist is in the band. And Blessing in Disguise is one of their biggest triumphs. Arguably their biggest triumph. I'd say an album that comes a couple years later might be on par with that, but, you know, I don't want to give everything away, so we'll talk about that when it comes up. But when it comes to Blessing in Disguise, whether you want something fast and heavy, whether you want something slow and somber, whether you just want some magnificent, perfected songwriting, Metal Church has that all in strides. And I can't say enough good things about Metal Church because people don't say enough good things about Metal Church. They're one of those bands that I feel like people always say, oh yeah, I've heard them before. I like them. Do you? Have you actually checked them out? If you haven't, I can't recommend them enough. And I think Blessing in Disguise is a fantastic album to be able to start with. And there's a reason why I hold it so near and dear to my heart. Yeah, seriously, check out Metal Church, and especially check out Blessing in Disguise. Following that, at number 2, I have DRI for sadly the last time a part of this whole list, but it is their best album, with Thrash Zone. This is the seminal crossover thrash album. I mean, of course, there's so many other great bands in the genre. Of course, you got your Corrosion of Conformity, you got Suicidal Tendencies, you got so many great bands. But DRI, for me, put out the perfect crossover thrash album with Thrash Zone. Every song on this album hits so hard. Whether it hits you mentally, whether it's talking about things that are still sadly relevant in 2023, like gun control or abduction. Whether you just want to be feeling like you're in the middle of a circle pit like in the beginning of Thrashered. Whether you just feel like a deadbeat loser, like myself, with a song like Beneath the Wheel. There's so many great examples of what I could talk about with DRI. But again, like I talked about in the previous video for 88s with Four of a Kind, that is a fantastic, phenomenal album. But Thrash Zone is the pinnacle. It is the top of the top, the cream of the crop. Thrash Zone by DRI. If you want the definition of crossover thrash, you can't do much better than Thrash Zone. And then finally, at number 1, I have Faith No More with The Real Thing. Bay. No, wait, sorry, I don't want to get a copyright claim. My apologies. But yes, this album is more than epic, and I mean that in more than one way. Yes, of course, the band's best-known song, Epic, is on this album, and anyone that writes off Faith No More as a nu metal band clearly has only ever heard Epic. I mean, listen to a song like Zombie Eaters. Does that sound like a nu metal song to you? Of course not. Faith No More has never written the same song twice. They get near death metal at times. They get industrial. They write country. They write rap rock. They experimented with every single style. But unlike Mike Patton's other big band, well, big in the relative term, Mr. Bungle, Faith No More did everything more in a mainstream streamlined sound. So those that really don't want to go over the top wacky are able to appreciate Faith No More, because Faith No More is a band that is really just hard to categorize. I guess a way that you could say them is alternative metal, although I feel like that has a lot of negative connotations depending on what you listen to. I guess a really fair way to be able to say it is they sound like Faith No More. They are their own genre, because they don't write the same song twice. They almost don't even write in the same style twice, and that's what I love about them. But yeah, this album covers everything that I love about rock and metal. Even if I've heard Epic enough times in my life, when I listen to the real thing from start to finish, Epic still sounds perfectly great on it. And there's a reason why it was such a huge hit for them. And I'm glad it was. I just wish there was other songs off this album that got that same notoriety. But, alas, here we are in 2023, talking about an album from 1989. And if you want to know that Faith No More is more than just that band that wrote Epic, then you need to check out The Real Thing. And that does it, everybody, for my top 10 albums of 1989. I tried to do this one a little bit faster, just to see if people will appreciate that a little bit more. I feel a little jittery doing that, so maybe it might be the right thing to do, maybe not. But you tell me. And also, if you like my list, or if you want to tell me how wrong I am for picking out my top 10 personal favorite albums of 1989, write them in the comments down below, aimed at you, we're the Cowboys from Hell. And of course, like, comment, subscribe, notification bell, all that stuff if you so choose. I would appreciate it. I would like to get back to 1,000 subscribers. We'll see if that happens. But until next time, next week, next Saturday, will be the top 10 albums of 1990. And until my next interview, review, list, or otherwise, for Heavy Debriefings, this is Josh Ronquist saying, see ya.